Hey, what's up YouTube? You're watching Ready Set Drone, and I have the Air 2S right here. This thing has only been out for a little while, and I'm going to tell you some tips to get the best images out of it, both photo and video, so stay tuned. So if you're new to this channel, I hope you'll hit the subscribe button and smash the notification bell so that you'll get notified when there's new videos. I'm doing a lot of videos about the Air 2S, but I also cover FPV, toy drones, and lots of other cool stuff. So please subscribe and join the community. So the Air 2S has created quite a buzz in the drone community as far as camera drones go. It is a very, very capable drone with a lot of cinematic features built into it, and it is smaller than the Mavic 2 Pro, which was the standard for foldable video drones up until just a little while ago. It has a 1-inch camera sensor and shoots 5.4K and a whole bunch of other things. You can check all those details out in my review if you want to check that out. But this video is more about some tips that I can tell you that you may not know right off the top of your head or at first glance that can help you get better images both in your photos and your videos. So let's get started. So my first tip is to use the ND filters. Now, for a long time when I first started flying drones, I didn't use ND filters. I didn't really see the purpose of them. And once I realized how helpful they could be in a couple of ways, I started using them all the time. Now, the Fly More combo from DJI does come with a set of 4 ND filters that allows you to knock down the amount of light coming into the camera and onto the sensor. And what that does for you is allows you to shoot at a lower shutter speed, therefore giving you a little bit more of that natural motion blur, which is very appealing to the human eye. It also protects your camera and gives you a little bit more definition when the sky is really bright because it's able to knock down a bit of that brightness that's coming out of the clouds or off of water reflections and stuff like that. Now, these are not polarizing filters, they're ND filters, and there's 4 of them for different amounts of brightness in the sky. You can try them out, experiment with them, but if you use them, I promise you're going to get better looking shots from both video, hyperlapses, and all that good stuff. They also protect the lens. Although I haven't seen any available yet, the polarizing filters are a must-have, and when they come out, I will certainly get some of those as well. But for now, use the ND filters to protect your camera lens as well as give you better, prettier, smoother looking shots to the human eye. So the next thing I want to talk about is Pro Mode. It's built into the DJI Fly app, but it's only available on the Air 2S. It's not available on the Mavic Air 2 or the Mini 2. What you do is you go in, and in the bottom right corner, there is a button you push that allows you to switch from fully auto to Pro Mode. And what Pro Mode does is essentially the same thing on a camera when you set your camera for shutter priority, or you want to lock in the ISO at a certain ISO versus being in auto, or you want to be in auto. In some cases, it's better to have the ISO turned on to auto so that as you move from shadows to lightness, the camera can adjust, but it doesn't change your shutter speed. If you want to lock that shutter speed in at 60 frames per second, that's perfect because it'll get you that nice motion blur. Now, this does have a fixed aperture of 2.8, so you can't control that, but controlling shutter speed and ISO allows you to do a lot with the camera that you couldn't do if you were just running fully automatic. So check out the Pro Mode, play with it a little bit, and see what you can do to get the best shots possible. One other thing I learned about the app that's really cool is that you can tap to focus, and the exposure is adjustable there as well. So usually you go to this little button in the lower right that says EV, which is exposure value, which you can turn it up or down, which allows you to kind of compensate for really bright skies or really dark conditions. If you tap anywhere on the screen to focus, to the right of that will be a little icon that looks like the sun that you can slide up and down that allows you to adjust the exposure value so that you get the best exposure value for bright sun or a dark situation. It's much easier than going into the EV setting and having to mess with it that way. I really like the fact that you can do your focus area and your exposure at the same time using this feature. The next tip I'll give you is to give Mastershots a shot. What Mastershots does is goes in and does very precise things, much like the Quickshots do. So like a droney or a rocket or a orbit where it's turning and rotating at the same time so it keeps the subject in focus. The thing with Mastershots is you might try to think of it as being one long minute plus, 2 minute plus thing that the drone does that is kind of cool but not very useful as a standalone thing. But don't think of it that way. Think of Mastershots as a way to get a whole bunch of really juicy B-roll of a certain object or something you're trying to highlight that then you can cut up and put into your video in different spots. So in other words, as it does the droney, or it does the rocket, or it does the orbit, and it does all those things perfectly, take each of those pieces individually and cut them together so that you have nice B-roll that's done precisely by the automated flying of this drone. That way you have nice looking B-roll that you can add to your video, and you don't have to go in and do each of those things individually or try to do them manually. So Mastershots is definitely worth playing with. The next thing is not something new to this drone, but something you should probably always do with every drone that has internal storage, and that is make sure that your storage is by default set to the card versus the internal storage. And the reason I say that is this only has 8 gigs of internal storage, which is okay in a pinch if you need to get one shot and you don't have a card or your card is full, but it's a pain if you record to that and then you actually have to hook this up to your computer to download the footage, or because it's a small amount of space, you may not get all of the footage. So go in and set your default to be the external card and then only use the internal 8 gigs of storage in a pinch. But always make sure your card is the first thing it starts recording to so you can get all of the shots, and you're going to have a much bigger card than 8 gigs. The next tip is to change your Quickshots from 1080 to 4K. Now, even if you're shooting in 1080, Quickshots I think should always be done in 4K because they are something you can use individually on social, and if you want to be able to punch in or pan and scan on them, 4K is going to give you that capability if you're editing in something lower like 1080. It doesn't take up a whole lot of space on the card either because Quickshots are just that, they're quick. So even though they're 4K footage, they're not long shots. They're generally a few seconds, and therefore you're not going to have huge files that go with them. So I would change your default for Quickshots to the 4K setting, not the 1080 that it comes out of the box in. The next tip is to turn on the photo recording when you're doing a hyperlapse. Hyperlapses are awesome, and this drone does a great job of exporting the hyperlapse at the end of it into a video file. But there may be cases where you want to pull a still image from that, or you may want to make a hyperlapse that is really color corrected and really smooth, and that's much easier to do if you have each individual photo. In other words, as the drone moves along, let's say you have it set to take an image every 2 seconds, you'll actually not only get the video file of that entire hyperlapse, but you'll get every single individual photo along with it, and you can do a lot more to manipulate those photos and make a even cooler looking hyperlapse than you can if you just use the default. Now the default does a great job, but I find those photos useful to have for adjusting if you want to do a better hyperlapse, and also if you want a photo, a really clear photo, you can pull one from that set and they're going to be really high resolution, so you can get a nice image for Instagram or for your thumbnail or for any other use where you don't have to pull an individual frame from the video file. You actually have each photo. So I'd say turn on the photos when you're doing hyperlapses. So along those lines with photos, the next tip says to capture the RAW file and the JPEG as you're shooting photos with this thing. Now, why do you want to do that? JPEGs are great, but they're not very adjustable without some loss. You can go in and adjust colors and brightness and all that kind of thing, but when you do that to a JPEG, you compromise some things, whereas with a RAW file, you can go in and actually adjust the exposure value as if you had changed it in the camera before you shot it. So it's more lossless, gives you a lot more leeway to do color correction and adjustments on your photos, and really, at the end of the day, I've now started shooting all of my photos with my handheld camera as well as my drones with JPEG and RAW. And if it's something I just want to get out quickly, I use the JPEG. But if it's something I want to make really look great, I take it into Photoshop or some other image processing software and I adjust the RAW file so I can get it just right before I send it out. And besides, if you don't need them, you can always delete them. There's nothing that says you have to keep the RAW files. They are bigger, but I think it's worth shooting with both so you have that versatility. And one more tip around shooting photos. I suggest you shoot in the 3:2 aspect ratio versus the 16:9 aspect ratio. And while 16:9 is kind of the modern standard for monitors, TVs, phones, etc., the 3:2 actually gives you more data to work with. You can pull the same resolution 16:9 photo out of the 3:2 as you would get if you shot it in 16:9, but you have a lot more vertical pixels to work with. So if, for example, there was something in the bottom of the frame that you didn't like in the photo, you can take that out by just exporting the 16:9 photo a little bit higher and cropping out the bottom. Basically, the 16:9 is a cropped version of the 3.2. The 3.2 gives you more data overall, and it's going to give you the ability to really pick the centering and the framing that you want when you export the photo. Okay, and finally, my last tip for the DJI Air 2S to get the best images possible is to invest in a 128 or a 256 gigabyte fast micro SD card. Now, I know 32 gigs and 64 gigs was plenty for most people before, but honestly, if you're shooting 5.4K or you're recording all these raw images or you're doing hyperlapses and recording a bunch of photos along with it, you're gonna fill that card out very quickly. This thing will take up to a 256 gig micro SD card. I've got some recommended ones in the description. I highly suggest you get a 128 or 256 to fly with, and that way you're not running out of space all the time and having to use that last 8 gigs of internal storage. So just to recap the 10 tips to get the best images out of the Air 2S. Number 1, use the ND filters, and when those polarizing filters come out, I'd get some of those too. Number 2, turn on Pro mode and play with it so you can get the best possible images with the best possible settings for what you're doing. Number 3, adjust exposure by tapping to focus and then moving the icon up and down. It's much easier and quicker. Number 4, learn to use Mastershots, but don't think of Mastershots as a complete thing. Think of it as a series of short shots that you can interject into your video. Number 5, make sure your default recording is set to the card and not to the internal storage, or else you'll run out of space very quickly and you'll have to hook this thing up to your computer and turn it on, which is a bit of a pain. Number 6, switch your Quickshots default from 1080 to 4K for recording all your quick shots. Number 7, turn on photo capture for hyperlapse because you'll be able to use those photos for a variety of things, and if you don't, just delete them. Number 8, always shoot your photos JPEG plus RAW, which is the DNG format. That way you have that versatility with the RAW file to play with. If you've never played with RAW before, it's really cool, it's super easy to do, and you can get such a better looking picture than you can if you just shoot the JPEG by itself. Number 9 is shoot your photos in 3:2 aspect ratio, not 16:9. That way you get all of the vertical data, an extra 600 pixels or so of data that you can play with when you export the photo. With 16:9, you lose those 600 pixels. And number 10, invest in a good, fast 128 or 256 micro SD card so you don't run out of space while you're out flying. So that's it. I hope this was useful. If you have questions or comments or other tips that you want to share, please leave them in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time on Ready, Set, Drone.